Hello there, and welcome to Surviving Your Splits, How to Actually Love the Holidays Again course. I'm so happy you're here, and I know we're going to have a lot of fun in each of these modules. In the first module, we're going to talk about why the holidays really can be awful. I promise you're not crazy if you think they are. I promise you're not Scrooge when you'd rather hide under the covers and not deal with anything from the week before Thanksgiving to January 2nd, especially when you're going through or recovering from a divorce. What we'll learn in this first module is why the holidays have set us up for failure. That's not to say that we are just going to sit here and be angry. Oh no. What we will do instead is learn to understand the contradictions and craziness that have us feeling this way so we can learn to overcome it this holiday season. Are you ready? Well, let's get to it. So, before we begin, I want you to take a second to think about something. When you think of the perfect holiday season, what do you imagine? Be as detailed as you'd like. What foods do you eat? Who is there with you? Where are you when you celebrate it? What do the decorations look like? And how do you feel? So write all those things down. Once you've written those things down, and at any time during this course and during this module that I'm asking you questions, feel free to pause it if you need any more time and just resume whenever you're more comfortable. That's completely fine because remember, this is your course. Now, once you've written down those ideas of a perfect holiday, I want you to think about something. And the thing I want you to think about is, where do your ideas come from? Take a little time to write that down. And like I said, you can even pause the video if you need to. So let's discuss what you put down. Where do your ideas of a perfect holiday come from? Was it from what you saw growing up? Was it from the Macy's department store windows? Was it from the movies like It's a Wonderful Life? The one thing all these have in common is that they are perfect and that we make the connection with them with perfect meaning happy. But what we learn as we move on from divorce is the holidays are a time that aren't exactly perfect, and they're certainly not happy for many of us. So let's flip the coin and look at something a little bit more realistic for all of us. I want you to take a minute to write down the following. Describe how your holidays have been in the past few years. And once you have that written down, how did those holidays make you feel about yourself? So we'll just take a second or two to just jot that down. Once you have all of these things written down, here's some critical thinking going on. What differences did you notice between the two sets of questions? What differences did you notice between what you defined the perfect holiday season as and where those ideas came from versus some of the holidays that you've had in the recent years and how they've made you feel? Now, don't feel bad if there's any negativity from that. In fact, what you are probably noticing is that your answers between the first two groups of questions are very different from what's going on in the second group of questions. And therein lies one of the struggles we deal with as to why the holidays pretty much suck for us nowadays. There have been so many impossible expectations on what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to be that it's practically impossible to meet any of those standards. This gets you thinking about the source of a lot of our holiday pain. It's the expectation of what perfect and joyous should be. But don't worry. During this module, we're going to dig deep and you'll discover why it's the expectations that's causing this harm. And we'll also start to learn how we can turn that around so we can start enjoying the holiday season again. So let's talk about those impossible expectations that we get slammed with during this season. You know, those expectations that start creeping up on us before Halloween is even over, and the ones that drag us through the mud until January. Well, they didn't appear out of thin air. In fact, they were centuries in the making. Now, I promise this course is not going to be a history class. You did, after all, purchase a course on how to feel better after the holidays, especially as you're recovering from divorce. But I want to take a second to explore those circumstances, and they're very, very important for us because they've contributed to the reasons why we feel stressed, lonely, and miserable. So, how did we get this place to begin with? Well, first, let's look a little bit about the history of a perfect holiday and where that whole idea even comes from. Although there were many groups throughout the Western world that went all out for Christmas, the craziness really started happening during the Victorian era. It's hard to imagine now, but at the beginning of the 19th century, Christmas was hardly celebrated. Many businesses didn't even consider it a holiday. However, by the end of that century, it had become the biggest annual celebration and took on the form that we recognize it as today. The transformation happened very fast, and it spread to the United States as well, and it came through all sectors of society. Many attribute this to Queen Victoria, and it was during her marriage to German-born Prince Albert that introduced some of the most prominent aspects of Christmas that we know and sometimes resent today. So first came this over-the-top Christmas tree. So what happened in the 1840s was there was a newspaper in London that published a drawing of the whole royal family celebrating around a decorated Christmas tree, which was a tradition that was reminiscent of what Prince Albert's childhood was like in Germany. Soon after this was published, every home in Britain had a tree that was bedecked with candies and sweets and fruit and homemade decorations and small gifts. So after the Christmas tree came the Christmas cards. A few years later, Christmas cards went into production, and by 1880, almost 12 million cards were in circulation. The commercialization of Christmas was well on its way, and not far behind it was decorating the home and going all out with some of the same things that we're dealing with today. After these, the Christmas gifts came. And the Christmas gift giving, which was once modern things such as very modest things like fruit and nuts and handmade gifts, those became more central to the festival, and people were encouraged to buy bigger and store-bought gifts instead. After the gifts came the crazy feasts. So Christmas feasts, which have their roots in the Middle Ages, started to modernize with turkey and other dishes that we enjoy today. Now this sounds pretty good, right? Well, here's what they don't tell you. So guess who was responsible for organizing all of this stuff? If you guessed women, it would be right. It was the women of the household who were in charge of doing all these things. Now, there's no surprise with that, right? Most of the time, we as women, unfortunately, have to take on a lot of the household work. But here is the kicker, and here's the part that's really crazy, is they started to make all these Christmas preparations in July. They were doing this for 5 months. Who in the hell has the time to do that? So the roles of women in society has certainly changed since the 19th century. And while there's been a great deal of progress, and that's been made, although we still have a long way to go, here's what's crazy is how is it that we've made all this progress, but we still have this expectation of a perfect Christmas that has not evolved into something more manageable? And how are you expected to live up to an ideal that comes from a completely different time frame? Why are we still being held to a standard that was created during a time when people didn't even have toilet paper or deodorant, for crying out loud? So here's a newsflash. You don't have to. You don't have to be held to that standard anymore if you don't want to. So it's really any wonder, though, why we're still stressed about this? Is it really any wonder why we feel like we can never live up to these standards? The history of the holidays laid the groundwork for the impossible cultural standards that we see all around us, online and in the media, everywhere we go. You don't have to look far to see it, and it seems that it comes to us earlier and earlier each year. We see images and messages that tell us that we need to start spending hours preparing for the holidays, as well as spending money, money, money to make things look absolutely perfect. So I call this whole thing the Martha Stewart Hallmark Food Network Pinterest effect. So for short, we'll just call it the Hallmark Effect. So you know what I'm talking about. It's any time that we see things on the media that look perfect and amazing, and while they may serve as inspiration to try out our own projects during the holidays, the constant barrage of them, the do this, do that, make everything perfect, actually sends subliminal messages to our brains. And those messages aren't good, because those messages are sending the false notion that a perfect holiday exists. Those messages are saying that if we'll try just a little harder, if we work just a little bit more, if we spend just a little bit more money, we'll achieve this idea of perfection. It's also giving us this misconception that a perfect holiday equals a perfect life, and a perfect holiday equals happiness. And we all know now that that can be further from the truth. And it's also giving us this false perception, and it's this horrible belief that everybody else is nailing it and doing it right, so why aren't you? What's wrong with you? So instead of turning to these sites as a way to be inspired to create something meaningful for ourselves and our families, we once again start to feel inadequate. And with these impossible ideas in the media, who can blame you? Because they're around us all the damn time. So what we're going to do now is there are two groups of pictures that I want to show you. And I want you to see if you can tell the disconnect between these two groups of pictures. So we're going to have a column of what society expects of us. And there's a column then of what reality really shows. So do you see the disconnect here? And what is that disconnect? How does the societal expectations differ between what our reality really is? And how does that disconnect between society and history and cultural expectations play on what really happens to us in real life? If you've noticed a chasm between these two sets of pictures, you are not alone. You see, there's a common phrase that says, stress occurs when reality does not meet expectations. No other time during the year is that more true than during the holiday season. We want so much for things to be perfect because we equate that perfection with feeling happy. And one of the reasons the holidays are so crappy is because the expectations keep getting pressed upon us year and year and year. So by this point, we just have all of these perceptions that we've been failures and we're never going to amount to having a perfect holiday. And that is not fair. Most of these standards of a perfect holiday have nothing to do with family and warmth and togetherness. And in fact, they were envisioned by men in back rooms or at smoky board meetings as they were scheming on how to get more money from people. That's what it was. While society has changed and progressed in other areas since then, that idea still remains. And it's an idea that we have still bought into time and time again. So what will you do to kick these crazy commercial expectations to the curb? What can you do to rise above those crazy outside pressures that you are put in? So we've already talked about those unrealistic expectations that the media and commercialization has pressed upon us. But here's what's kind of interesting, is as much as that is our daily part of our lives, it doesn't tell the entire story of our holiday season. And in fact, a lot of times those images is just a bunch of sugarcoating. So while that Hallmark and Pinterest effect contributes to our not liking the holidays, there are other internal factors, ones that I think are more insidious, that can have a more damaging impact on us if we let them this holiday season. Here's the thing. Many of us have suffered trauma during these forced, most wonderful times of the year. This happens for a lot of reasons, and while I'm not a mental health professional, one of the reasons this may happen is because trauma we endured in the past either occurred during the holiday season or there was something about the holidays that triggered those horrible traumatic memories for us again, and it takes us back to a place where we don't want to be. And this trauma, for many of us, could have multiple sources. So many of us have suffered this trauma that includes past divorce or breakups. If not during the holidays, maybe that feeling of being alone and heartbroken can get even more pronounced during the holidays. So in addition to divorce, there's abuse. Many of us are survivors of physical or sexual or mental or emotional abuse, and we endured that during the holidays, or there's something about the holidays that triggers those awful memories for us. In addition to the abuse, a lot of us have also dealt with poverty during the holidays, being keenly aware of, as children or adults, that we couldn't afford certain Christmas presents, or we were worried, or we saw our parents worrying that we were not going to get enough to eat. And that becomes very, very salient during the holiday season. And other types of tragedies, such as death of a loved one or other bad memories. So even if we feel like we've recovered from a lot of these traumas, or we're at least working through them and coping, we're getting through our divorce, we are taking ownership and being survivors of abuse, we are getting through those memories of poverty and coping and grieving from the death of a loved one, we can still get triggered. So, do you ever wonder why you feel so depressed around Christmas or the holidays in general? Well, it's not just you, and you're not just imagining this. You're not crazy, and I promise you, you are not being overly dramatic. It's a lot of forces whirling around that have created this perfect storm of feeling like shit. And even if you recovered from the trauma, wherever it was, the main fact is that the holidays are a time that is supposed to celebrate family and togetherness and joy, and that means that we're going to be triggered and reminded of all of the stuff that didn't amount to that. And so we were taken back to a time when we were in an emotional free fall. So basically what I'm saying, and this is a technical term, is our collective memories can be a bunch of assholes to us during this time of year. And it is completely unfair, especially as we're trying to move on and recover after divorce. So here's something that's even more jacked up. Even when we are still grappling with the past loss that gets triggered during the holidays, and we're learning how to navigate through the memories of trauma and divorce while we're supposed to be celebrating the most wonderful time of the year, we have this other part of our brain that wants to screw with us. And that other part of the brain is called selective memory. And it wants to come out and play too when the holidays roll around. So selective memory from a scientific perspective makes sense. It is a coping skill that our cognition uses to filter out the bad stuff and only presents the good stuff for us. In a way, it's kind of a survival tool. It's like a coping mechanism that our minds are programmed to do sometimes to help us when we're having a really bad time in our lives. It sanitizes our past images so we can actually move on and survive and get away from that situation. It's weird, right? So we have these two competing mental factors, the traumatic triggers as well as the selective memory, that are competing with one another all the time and come to a head during the holidays. The trauma triggers are alerting us to a time when we were sad and now wants us to feel sad again, while the selective memory is pushing filtered, perfect holiday memories on us and is saying to us, what's wrong with you? Why are you feeling bad when you should be happy all the time like you were in the past? What's your problem? So when you have these conflicting messages that you're dealing with in your mind, it is definitely not helpful. So I want to talk a little bit more about selective memory. They have a tendency to fool us like you wouldn't believe. So many times during the holiday season, especially when we are feeling sad and alone and we're getting triggered by those traumatic events, we have a tendency in our minds to go back to a simpler, more peaceful time, and we'll then reminisce about all the great holidays we remember when we were younger, or maybe right when we got married and everything seemed wonderful, and when our children were younger and we were able to experience the holiday season through their eyes with their innocence. So we have a tendency to be selective about these times though. While there's nothing wrong with remembering good times, the problem comes when we frame the entire past through those lenses, because then we're pitting our current situation against an imagined ideal. And that is not going to end well, because we're all just going to feel like crap at the end. So let's do something really fast. Take a minute to write down some examples of holiday selective memory in your life. Is there a time that you can think back to during your marriage when over the years you may only be remembering the good? Now I'm happy to give you an example or two, although I'm sure that you pretty much have your own. So as an example of this is that I can think of is the first Christmas I had as a divorced woman. I remember feeling really bad and having that melancholy because I was no longer with my husband and it was my first marriage as a single woman. And I remember sitting at my table at Christmas Eve with a glass of wine and just feeling really nostalgic and sad, thinking about how one of our first Christmases together, we were in New York City at Rockefeller Center and the snow was falling and oh, it was beautiful. And I remember thinking that earlier Christmas time when I was still married, and I remember moping around thinking how I wasn't sharing that experience as a married woman anymore, and so I was really feeling sorry for myself. But a few days later, guess what came back to me? The part that I had forgot about that whole part was when we were fighting the whole damn time throughout the whole weekend because he was driving like a maniac and all the parking tickets he kept getting because he was parking in illegal places. I mean, he was racking up hundreds of dollars. So why didn't my selective memory remember that part for me? Isn't selective memory funny like that? So the point when we are listing our selective memories and thinking critically about it is not to disparage your holiday memories. That is not the point of this exercise. But it's important to remember that there are unfair standards that are playing a role in why you're feeling bad right now. Just recognize that we have a tendency to see them only through rose-colored glasses when we are having a hard time and we were wishing for a different situation than the one that we are in now. But this view does not help us. While it's important to reflect on the things that you cherished in the past, just remember, like in your current situation, they weren't perfect, but forever evolving and making mistakes and being human. With that in mind, let's dig a little bit deeper on where you are right now and why that's making you feel less than stellar. So I want to share with you guys those charts again, and they're going to be a little bit different. They may look kind of familiar. It's similar to the expectations versus reality charts that we visited earlier, but the left-hand column here shows our selective memory, the things that we filter out to make our past seem perfect. And then the right-hand column shows the traumatic events that we may be triggered during the holidays. So, what do you think both of these columns have in common? Think about it. Both of them seem kind of contradictory, but what is the connection between the two? It's a lot easier than you think, I promise. They both make you feel bad. Both types of memories are making us feel inadequate. They conflict with one another, and we have to battle both of them at the same time during the holiday season. No wonder why we're so stressed. If anything, these contradictions confirm what you knew in your heart all along. You've been through a lot of crap, and it's no wonder why you're feeling so tired and so unmotivated and so hurt. So please, I beg you, don't beat yourself up. You deserve happiness and you deserve taking a break. Don't beat yourself up if you feel like you can't reach some unattainable, stupid standard that nobody can. So, as much as I can tell you that, you guys may still end up feeling bad, but that's not good either. Because consequences for feeling bad and conflicted about all this crazy stuff can be damaging. And the reason why it can be damaging is because these consequences make us overcompensate for many things during the holiday season. And we've all been guilty of this. We may end up spending too much money because we think, oh, if I buy all these perfect gifts, then I'll be happy and I'll make people around me happy. But we still continue to experience a sense of loss and grief. And being divorced can make us feel even worse about that. Then what happens is we may continue to have feelings of low self-esteem and lack of confidence. So when we're recovering from divorce and we're dealing with all of these crazy expectations and selective memories, we can continue to feel bad when instead we should really be giving ourselves a freaking break. And it comes as no surprise that when we're going through divorce and we're dealing with all this holiday BS, we continue to feel stress, and more stress. So you have that typical holiday stress, and when you pit that against the divorce stress that you're going through, whether it's you're trying to figure out if you're going to leave your spouse, or if you're in the middle of a divorce right now, or even it's been years and you're still trying to recover from your divorce, when you put all this stress together, it really is like a nuclear explosion and a ticking time bomb. It's there and it's real, and if anybody says that it's just in your head, they're full of shit. But it's not just you. Our going through the motions and trying to overcompensate during the holidays isn't doing any good for anybody. So basically, I guess I'm saying that you're not alone in this. You're not crazy, and you're not a Scrooge, and don't think that just because you're not enjoying the holidays means that you're just some weirdo and you're the black sheep, because you're certainly not. So, as a way to validate that it's not just you going through all this craziness, I want us to take a look at some of the other most wonderful time of year contradictions that we are going through right now as a society. So, these are a couple of clips that I ended up finding when I was searching the internet. One of the ones it covered was the amount of money that everybody's spending during the holiday season. And it says by 2018, people are expected to spend $28 billion in the holiday season alone. That is a lot of money. In addition to that, in January, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, in January, that is actually when the highest rates of filing for divorce occur. And then also, there have actually been studies that there are higher rates of depression during the holidays. And so I promise it's not just you going through this. We're all in this imperfect boat together. And the goal is actually trying to figure out how we can claim this for ourselves. So let's take a look at this for just a second when we're looking at the finances. Studies show that we rack up this huge amount of credit card debt during the holiday season, and there are probably a number of reasons for this. It deals with those historical and cultural expectations we've discussed, but many of us also do it as a way of overcompensating. We have this idea that if we just get the perfect gift, then everything's going to be fine. But that doesn't happen, and come January, we're hit with credit card debt and more stress than we're already dealing with our divorce stress. Nobody's having a great time with this, but the damn retailers. So then also, when we're taking a look at relationship stress, especially with divorce, a recent survey in the United States and UK confirmed something that many of us have already suspected, and that's the rates for filing for divorce spike in January. Although, as you know, there are many things that contribute to the end of a marriage, you can't help but wonder if the stress of the holidays, all of the expectations shoved on us, the family drama, and everything else doesn't have an impact on divorce in January. You're damn right it does. Also, one of the things when we're talking about depression, like the Huffington Post article did, it's no secret that we're under pressure, and it's not just in your head. Studies from the Mayo Clinic have concluded that the triggers for stress, anxiety, and depression are all set up against the backdrop of the holiday season due to the intense demands that the season puts on us, from shopping to planning to traveling to forced interaction with family members that already know our triggers. And when these factors are combined with the reeling emotions we experience when we're going through or recovering from divorce, it is a Pandora's box of misery. So the bottom line here, everyone, is you are not alone. It's not just you feeling bad about the holidays. There are a lot of people who are in the same boat as you, but the difference between you and them is the fact that you are being proactive and you are taking ownership of this issue to reclaim your holidays. And that's what's going to set you apart. So, in this module, we have identified the factors that contribute to why we feel awful during this time of year. But that doesn't mean that we just have to let those things go and be okay with that. From the heartbreak of divorce to the stress of the family and spending, or thinking about the trauma and loss associated with our past holidays. They do not have the power to hold you prisoner anymore. So for the first exercise of this course, let's do something unique. Now, what we can do here, like I've talked about previously, is you can stop this module anytime you want, and you can write down these things, or you are actually going to find a customized worksheet to help you work through these end of module exercises, and you're going to find those in the attachments. You can write it out on your own, whatever works for you. So we've been talking a lot about not liking the holidays and the reason that might be. But now it's time to identify what exactly we don't like about it. So why are we doing this exactly? Because when we're able to identify and name our triggers, we are better able to overcome them. They no longer have control over us or the holiday season when we know what it is that makes us miserable. And the reason they don't have control over us is because now we know how to counteract them. So in this exercise, you are going to see 4 columns for triggers. I've put down some of the most common ones: emotional, financial, family, logistical. And under each column, what we're going to do is think about what, if any, things that you don't like about the holidays. Now, you may have your own categories, and you can write those down too. So let's take a look at what I have put down as an example. And when writing them, it may help to look at it as, an observer and from an objective point of view so you don't get upset. So, a word of caution though, the purpose of this exercise is not to get wrapped up in the things that make you miserable, but instead to pinpoint them so they can no longer control you. Alright, so let's look at the first one. So for me, some of the things that I don't like about the holidays from the emotional standpoint are I get sad sometimes because it reminds me of this horrible Christmas I had right before my husband moved out. And so sometimes I still get sad about that. So with the financial one, what I don't like and what just makes me feel uneasy is I feel like I get caught up in this cycle of buying all these gifts and food and decorations, and next thing I know, I've spent $800 and I didn't want to spend that $800, and it's just this awful, awful feeling. For my family, to be honest, my mom and my sister drive me crazy, and I just can't even deal with their drama and their craziness during the holiday season. It just makes me so insane. And logistical, I hate traveling during the holidays. It is a nightmare. I spend too much money. There's always blizzards and layovers, and it's just like a waste of my time, and it just really makes me upset. But remember, all we're doing here is identifying them, and we're not going to get wrapped up into that story. We're just going to objectively accept that these are triggers, and then we're going to move on to the next part of the exercise. So now comes the fun part. We've identified those triggers, and we may have more than one in each category, or we may not have any in some of the categories, and that's fine too. So here's what we're going to do with them. For each trigger, I want you to answer the following questions. How will I change my reaction to them? It seems so simple, right? But here's the thing. Like divorce itself, and like many things in life, it's not the actual occurrence of the thing that happens, but how we react to it that determines how we feel. The holidays are no different, and your triggers will be no different. So for each of the triggers, I want you to stop and think mindfully, when I start getting triggered, how will I flip the script and change my negative reaction to it? Look, we live life as we perceive it. So if you can mindfully neutralize the negativity of why your holidays are painful, then you can start to neutralize your painful memories of the holidays and get to a more neutral, accepting place. So if you need some nudging before you try it yourself, well, go ahead and look at my examples. So with my example for emotional, what I had triggered for me was being sad because it reminded me of my divorce. But this is how we can take ownership of it and change it. Yes, the holidays remind me of a very sad time when my marriage was ending, but guess what that also signifies? It's also a time that a painful chapter of my life, my failing marriage, which we were both miserable in, was ending. And it also signifies a chance hiding under the rubble of sadness to start over. So that's how I can flip the script, and you can do this too. And it's kind of the same with any of these. With the financial stuff, I can flip the script by saying, you know what, instead of being upset about that, I'm actually going to save the money I'm spending and instead use it for something I really want or really need. With the family, a way to flip that is I can choose to keep my distance from them or limit my time with them because I deserve to be around positive energy. And with the logistical part, once we've identified that trigger, the way we can release it, it says, hey, who says you have to travel? I can choose to stay in town, and I can be away from all the craziness and instead have something that's more peaceful. What I want you guys to remember is this. It's the internal reactions to our triggers and environmental factors around us that will determine our outlook and happiness. External things don't actually have the power to cause us to react a certain way. What we are responsible for is being joyous for ourselves, is taking control of what we want, is to ignore all the bullshit expectations around us, and to acknowledge that although horrible things might have happened to us in the past, they are not us, and we are not a prisoner to them, especially during the holiday season. So how will you choose to be during this holiday season? So let's just take a look at some key takeaways that we have from this module, and we are actually going to do these key takeaways at the end of every module if you need to review what we covered. So main thing I want you guys to remember is do not blame yourself for not liking the holidays. You're not alone. There's stress, there's craziness, and even the most saintly person is going to feel stressed out and overwhelmed during this time. So cut yourself a break and give yourself some credit because you're doing just fine. Something to also think about is there are a lot of external factors that may make you feel very stressed right now. We're expected to celebrate like Victorians from the 1800s, which is just silly because ain't nobody got time for that. And we're expected to have perfection like you see in staged productions on Pinterest and on the Food Network, which is just silly because all of that stuff is fake anyway. I say screw it. You're awesome just the way you are, and how you choose to celebrate the holidays is going to be great just how you choose it. So don't worry about anything else. And remember that don't feel guilty if you're feeling triggered. The holidays can trigger us and force us to remember trauma from the past, such as divorce or death or other kind of drama or poverty. So if you're feeling bad, forgive yourself a little bit. Cut yourself some slack. It's going to happen. But remember that if you can identify those triggers and be proactive and say, I choose not to let that affect me, or I choose to get help so someone can help me along with that path, then you're no longer going to be a prison of that, and you're no longer going to have to dread this holiday season. And lastly, I want you guys to remember that you are now empowered to change your reactions to those expectations and to change your reactions to those triggers and kick all that stress and anxiety and pain and anger to the curb. You can do it, and I have faith in you because you, ladies, are awesome. So that concludes our first module, and in our second module we are actually going to dig a little bit more in how to kick all those holiday expectations to the curb. You're going to love it, and I can't wait to see you over there. So let's go, shall we?